Is India making a risky bet by engaging with the Taliban? Since the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan back in 2021, India has quietly rebuilt its ties with Kabul, offering aid, reopening diplomatic channels, and seeking to counter the influence of Pakistan and China in the region. I'm Adijan Ayandar, and today's newsmaker is India's growing ties with the Taliban. At the heart of this shift is a security dilemma. Two militant groups based in Afghanistan who have long been a threat to India. But with Pakistan now distancing itself from the Taliban, India sees an important opportunity to strengthen its own position. So how is Delhi balancing its security interests without legitimizing a regime it once deposed? And then there's the important question of how Pakistan and China will react to India's growing influence in Afghanistan. Here's more on our story.
In August 2021, the US military's abrupt exit from Afghanistan sent shockwaves through the region. With the Taliban seizing control almost overnight, a power vacuum emerged, one that threatened to ignite extremist threats right at India's doorstep. New Delhi had to reassess its security interests in a neighbourhood where groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed had long threatened its stability. With militants now finding safe havens in Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, a new strategy became an urgent priority. In response, India began a quiet re-engagement with Kabul. After closing its embassy immediately following the Taliban takeover, New Delhi sent a technical team in June 2022 to resume humanitarian aid and slowly rebuild trust with the new regime. By November 2024, India agreed to host an unofficial Taliban envoy, paving the way for high-level talks earlier this year. While India has deepened its ties with Kabul, Pakistan has taken a different route. Alarmed by a series of attacks, including the recent hijacking of the Jafar Express in Balochistan, Islamabad has distanced itself from the Taliban. Pakistan's military insists that links to terrorism in its territory are rooted in Afghanistan.
We have evidence that all the links to terrorism in Pakistan are traced back to Afghanistan. They have centers there, they have leadership there, they are getting training and recruitment from there.
At the same time, China, the first country to appoint an ambassador to Afghanistan under the Taliban, is rapidly emerging as Afghanistan's major trading partner. Beijing is investing heavily in infrastructure and resource extraction projects, aiming to secure access to Afghanistan's untapped minerals, a move that further complicates India's regional strategy.
China has decided to grant zero-tariff treatment to all taxable products of the least developed countries, including Afghanistan. We believe that this will be conducive to promoting mutually beneficial and win-win economic and trade cooperation.
New Delhi's softly incremental approach is a calculated gamble. By engaging directly with Kabul, India aims to isolate extremist elements and counterbalance the influence of both Pakistan and China, while safeguarding its own national security. In a region where alliances shift like desert sands, India's delicate balancing act could redefine South Asian security. The question is, will New Delhi's measured diplomacy curb rival influences and shield its homeland from terror? Or will the risks present in Afghanistan prove undefeatable?
Joining me now to debate this and more are from Pakistan's capital, Islamabad, political analyst Imtiaz Gul, and from New Delhi, the diplomatic editor for the Hindu newspaper Suhasini Haidar. Welcome to both of you. Imtiaz, let me set the stage with you, why you think Delhi has now chosen this particular time to engage with the Taliban.
I mean, it's very obvious reason. India had lost some ground, diplomatic, political, after the fall of the Ashraf Ghani government with the return of the Taliban in August 2021. And I think it's the right of any sovereign country to stitch up relationship and to resume contacts with a country that it deems important for itself. And that's why I think India is now trying to patch up and reach out to the Afghan Taliban, who also appear to have welcomed the Indian outreach.
Suhasini, I want to get your take on it and perhaps maybe go a little deeper. What's your reasoning? And do you think that this shift is sustainable given the Taliban's historic ties to anti-India militant groups?
Well, let's put it this way. I think the government in New Delhi has pitched its engagement with the Taliban as a pragmatic and realistic approach. Those pictures you were showing of the Foreign Secretary of India meeting with the acting foreign minister of the Taliban in Dubai is really the highest level at which the government has engaged the Taliban regime so far. We've seen at a joint secretary level already many interactions, officials going from Delhi to Kabul over the last 2 years now. They've opened what is called a technical mission in Kabul. The big question is really going to be what is the nature of that diplomatic mission? So many countries, including Pakistan, China, Russia, Central Asia, I think Turkey as well, have now come to terms with a Taliban appointee in the embassies. So far, India has resisted that and made it very clear that no matter what happens, it's the Afghan tricolor of the republic that is recognized, and that will remain at the embassy in Delhi. But that a Taliban appointee may head up the embassy in Delhi is now being considered. I think it comes from, as Mr. Gul said, a desire to make sure that you secure your boundaries and you secure the neighborhood as much as possible. I think it also comes from a desire not to be cut out of whatever happens in Afghanistan next. And I think the last part is that India had a very close relationship with the Afghan government from 2001 to 2021. So India had a lot of investments, developments, infrastructure, projects built and goodwill inside Afghanistan. And the government wants to protect some of that.
Okay, Imtiaz, let me turn back to you. Suhasini was mentioning some of the countries in the region coming to terms. The fact is that India has sent to Afghanistan some humanitarian aid, and then there is limited diplomatic engagement with the Taliban, but without any official recognition. And I do want to underline that. How do you feel this reflects on India's broader foreign policy strategy?
Well, I think almost all the countries, including the United States, are being driven by pragmatism as far as reaching out to the Afghan Taliban are concerned. They are the de facto rulers of Afghanistan without any real opposition, if at all, even inside the country. So everybody, I think, sees a value in reaching out and resuming contacts with the Afghan Taliban. So far, I think, until the Donald Trump's arrival in White House, the White House had a very weak president who had not been expected to take any decision as far as the recognition was concerned. He did it on it, and we might possibly see Donald Trump lending that recognition sometime soon. And unfortunately, almost every country, including Pakistan, had been looking up to the United States to first lend a recognition and then follow suit. Unfortunately, it didn't happen, and the Taliban themselves also squandered some of the chances. At some stage, almost more than a year ago, the regional countries, including China, Russia, Pakistan, Iran, were on the brink of recognizing the Taliban regime. But then their very strict handling of women's issue, of female employment, education, basically came in the way of all these countries, and everybody then stepped back.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Imtiaz, let's take a look at this from the other side for just a moment. I mean, Afghanistan's current leadership has shown some willingness, I think it's fair to say that, to engage with India despite past hostilities. You mentioned pragmatism. Are you sticking by that, or do you think this could also be about securing much needed economic assistance?
Well, it's both. I mean, they have been demanding recognition as well as seeking investment, but the only way for getting substantial investment or substantial financial support was the issue of recognition. So I think their expectation was not misplaced, particularly if you look at the crime rate. In a big city like Kabul, the capital, it's almost zero. If you look at the corruption from a public level, public life, it has vanished. But obviously, it's not an ideal situation. I mean, wherever there are human systems, there will always be loopholes. But in general, compared to what it had been until 2021, Afghanistan's present situation is much more free of violence, much more free of crime, except that one part that has held off most of the countries, and that is relates to the women's education and employment.
Okay. Suhasini, let me turn to you. I want to look at two sides. On the one hand, you have reality, and on the other, motive. I mean, when you look at Pakistan's relationship with the Taliban, that is obviously cooled. We've established that, and it's partly due to concerns over the Pakistani Taliban. But do you feel that India could exploit this rift to strengthen its own position in Afghanistan, or is there still an idea that it's operating in a highly precarious space, you think?
Look, I don't think it can but be a very precarious space in Afghanistan. At the end of the day, the Taliban regime is not recognized by any country anywhere in the world. The United Nations does not recognize the Taliban regime there. Secondly, this is a regime that is made up of groups that have been declared terrorist organizations. So I don't necessarily disagree with Mr. Gul that maybe there's less violence to be seen on the face of it, but that's because the groups that were operating and conducting the violence for so many decades are now in charge. That doesn't make it a better situation. And thirdly, given the situation of women, when you think about the dire condition women are in Afghanistan, no education beyond the 6th grade, no jobs, not even in life-saving humanitarian work for doctors, medicine. Women are banned from all public parks. They're banned from anywhere. They can't travel without a male escort. Don't you think that sooner or later, this is an unsustainable situation, that half of your country is virtually a prisoner in their own homes? So I don't think this can be a sustainable situation. Let's remember, Afghanistan has not had a stable government, perhaps except for the 2001 to 2021 period. And we have seen this constant, the Taliban comes to power, but its brutality, its cruelty really ends up making it an unsustainable force at the top. Given that situation, however, and given the fact that countries that in the past, at least Pakistan and UAE and Saudi Arabia had recognized the Taliban in the years from 1996 to 2001. Now you see countries like Russia, China, Central Asian countries, Iran, Turkey, Pakistan, actually conducting very normal engagement with Afghanistan. Therefore, India feels really that it's not possible to completely isolate the regime there. Secondly, as you pointed out quite correctly, that in a scenario where India has seen the perils of allowing the Taliban and Pakistan, forces that are inimical to India to come together, it certainly wants to keep an eye on the situation and ensure that its security is maintained. In that sense, the Taliban has said time and again, at least in its statements, regardless of how trustworthy that is, that they don't have any ill will towards India, that they would like to see a stable region, that they want to live in neighborly relations in the region. So I think the government has decided to take them at their word. They also work with the Russian government, the Central Asians that have closer ties with the Taliban regime to remain a presence over there. I don't think there is yet an element of a feeling that this is a stable government or a government that can be trusted.
Okay. Imtiaz, I know that you were in agreement. I see that you were in agreement with some of the things that Suhasini was saying, but she didn't agree on all of your points. I want to give you a chance to respond.
No, I really don't want to get into this argument for and against, but I was just recently in Kabul 4 days ago. I spent a few days there, talked to a lot of people, to officials. As a whole, I mean, you see that the country is craving for contacts with the world abroad, however, without compromising on their fundamental issue of females, women, and that is I think what is dividing the Taliban or keeping Taliban off the global radar. As a whole, I think we are seeing probably a thaw in the relations with the United States. On the 20th, one of the American hostages was released through Adam Boehler, the Donald Trump's chief negotiator in Kabul itself. So that was the first formal contact of the Trump administration, of any administration with the Taliban regime. And I think the moment Donald Trump issues some sort of a statement or an executive order on any next move, I think every other country will follow suit. I wouldn't be surprised if in the coming months there is some sort of easement in the relations between Taliban and the United States of America, and I think that will open the gates, open the way for more other countries also to step into Afghanistan and reclaim their lost ground.
Okay, Suhasini, is the crux of the matter here really what Donald Trump or Washington really does?
I honestly am not sure, because when you're looking at what Donald Trump is doing in Ukraine and what he's doing in Israel and Gaza, you realize that there isn't necessarily a rule of law principle being used over there. In which case, will other countries want to join the US in what, as I said, is in some way recognizing an unsustainable scenario in Afghanistan? We also have to remember that the situation in Afghanistan has come about by a fraud. The Taliban regime that is over there signed the Doha Accord with the first version of this Trump government, or with their successor, in which they actually had made promises about a political resolution, about the treatment of minorities, women, and all the rest of that, which has not been binding, which they have not actually kept to. So I don't really understand what kind of relationship one is supposed to see the US now opening up with the Taliban. Yes, there can be transactions, there can be a hostage release, there can be a bounty removed from Sirajuddin Haqqani, as we have seen. There could be some amount of aid. USAID now has practically shut shop in Afghanistan, so maybe there's going to be some more aid coming. But I don't see how a larger scenario can happen in a country where the regime came to power on the pretext that they would do all of the things that they have not done. Mm-hmm. The bare minimum for countries has been so far that the Taliban has to allow girls to continue their education, has to allow girls, women to restart their jobs, and girls to grow up with some kind of a sense of future. If you're not able to give that, what would one expect that any country around the world would want to have anything more than the bare minimum of a relationship at that point?
Okay. Imtiaz, I want to switch gears with you for just a moment, and I'm wondering if I can get sort of the Pakistani side to this, because this is obviously an important factor in the equation. I'm wondering how Pakistan is viewing the growing engagement between India and the Taliban, and do you feel that it could possibly lead to further tensions?
Well, Pakistan, with a 2,500 kilometer long border with Afghanistan, obviously remains as much concerned about what's happening next door as the United States remains preoccupied with what's happening in Canada or Mexico. And obviously it raises concerns in Islamabad, in Rawalpindi, whenever there are contacts between the Afghan Taliban or any Afghan government and any other neighboring country. And also particularly to the context of allegations by Pakistan that the current wave of terrorism, the insurgency in Balochistan as well as in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, both provinces bordering India, is being stoked with the support of India. This is what they have very clearly alleged in their press conferences, the Balochistan chief minister as well as the spokesperson for the army. So when the security establishment of this country thinks that way, then obviously it would get alarmed whenever there are contacts between the Afghan Taliban and India, for that matter. And the Afghans are very, very, very clever in leveraging their position, as they are known for playing one against the other. This is what has been happening in the past, and this might happen again.
Okay, Suhasini, obviously moving into a more sensitive issues, and I know that you weren't totally on the same frequency with Imtiaz just a moment ago, whether it comes to the belligerence here.
Let's put it this way, the Indian government has made it very clear that they are not involved in what is happening inside Pakistan, and that it is India that has accused Pakistan over decades of fomenting violence, of harboring terrorists wanted for very, very major terror attacks inside India. They're harbored in Pakistan. Even people who have been convicted in Pakistani courts, or at least we've seen the evidence of that. So I don't think we're going to get very far if we're looking to see India or Pakistan being able to come to the same conclusion vis-a-vis Afghanistan. The fact remains that Afghanistan, under a regime like the Taliban, will always be a fallow ground for insurgents and for terrorists and for groups of the kind we saw in its previous regime. And there is no reason to believe that those groups have been curtailed in the current regime. Groups like ISK continue to exist, and the Taliban says it's fighting them, but the fact is that they exist in that territory. So I don't think it should come as a surprise to anyone that Afghanistan happens to be the staging ground for attacks. Now, to blame other countries for it, I think you have to show proof, or there's absolutely no point in just trading allegations. Okay,
Imtiaz, we talked about Washington and the Trump administration and the role it's playing in the region, but up until now we've sort of avoided the second 800-pound gorilla in the room, and that's China. I mean, the fact of the matter is that it's positioned itself as Afghanistan's a key economic partner, and while India remains more cautious. Do you feel that this is perhaps an intentional strategy of avoiding overcommitments, or is Delhi at risk of losing strategic ground to Beijing, you think?
Well, this risk is always there. This possibility is always there. China is involved in Afghanistan in a pretty big way compared to the role that the United States has played so far. I mean, they simply walked out of Afghanistan. But, geopolitics is very brutal. When geopolitical interests demand, then all countries will fall over one another in approaching the Taliban government. Same is the case of China. There is a very obvious stated intention and design by the United States to contain China's growing influence in the region. And that's why the CIA had set up a China Mission Center in October 2021. And in that, India is very much a partner. So Indo-US partnership against China, because both fear the Chinese growing influence. So, you cannot rule out the impact of this Indo-US and China rivalry playing out in Afghanistan. And because China is involved in Pakistan in a big way with the multiple $1 billion of investment, that investment is also now at risk because of the continued insurgency. And the interesting part of this entire situation is that the terrorism is playing out. The TTP, ISKP groups are mounting terrorist attacks only in Pakistan and not in other countries like Iran or Central Asia or China. So one would question as to how could a ragtag army called the TTP or its affiliates would be going out of their way to hurt Pakistani interests as well as Chinese interests. This is what the Baloch terrorist groups are doing in Balochistan. So as a whole, geopolitics is very complex, and what we see currently in Pakistan, I think, is how the geopolitical intentions are playing out.
Okay, Imtiaz, thank you very much for that. Suhasini, I have about a minute left on the show, and I want to talk about Beijing in terms of the cautious engagement that's being directed by Delhi. Is this really the motive behind it to act as a counterweight? And perhaps more importantly, do you feel that perhaps Delhi is falling behind the curve and it's not moving strong enough?
No, look, India looks at China's inroads into its immediate neighborhood in South Asia very closely to see how much China is able to do. With Afghanistan, there's always been a sense that China talks big, does not provide as much because of the security concerns inside Afghanistan. So some time ago, it was about copper mines in Afghanistan that never got realized. We hear now about the Taliban clearing the way for the Wakhan corridor to have a proper road all the way to China. Let's see if that also works, because obviously there are security concerns to all of this. I think what India prides itself on doing vis-a-vis China in the neighborhood is where it makes commitments. It is guided by the country, and it doesn't seek to just essentially make big projects. It seeks to make projects that country needs. So in the past, pre-Taliban, India has built the Afghan parliament. India has built the Zaranj-Dilaram highway that takes trade and people all the way around the south of Afghanistan. It has built the Salma Dam. It has built check dams. It has built schools in Afghanistan, the hospitals. So that's the kind of aid that India is able to do, and says it restricts itself to those until it can do something.
Fantastic. Suhasini Haidar and Imtiaz Gul, thank you very much for joining us here on this edition of the Newsmakers. Do appreciate your analysis. Well, thanks for watching. Of course, you can follow us on X and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Alijan Ayanlar, and we'll see you next time here on the Newsmakers.